Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Moscow Board of Adjustments for January 8th, 2024. I'm going to add a first item, and it will be introductions because we have a new member. And we'll just introduce ourselves as we go down. I'm the board chair until we do item 2.
We'll see about that.
And so I'm Joe.
Joe, I'm Ivy Dickinson.
Hi, I'm Marshall Comstock. I'm vice chair at this point in time.
I'm Tim. I mean, I know each other already.
Yeah, I'm Steve.
Me too.
I'm the other Tim Thompson. I'm Jerry Schutz.
Nice to
At
meet
the other end.
everybody.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Our second item now is actually approval of minutes from our last meeting, which dates back to August. I was not present, but we did have 3 people there. So do any of you have comments
I will
on the
move to
meeting
approve.
minutes?
I second.
We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? 1, I wasn't there.
I wasn't here.
2,
Wasn't here.
and 3. So basically, we still have approved it, but we had 4 abstentions and 3 ayes, 0 nays. So that gets us to the board elections. And honestly, I like to move that to the end so that we can deal with our conditional use first. So with that, Amy, will you give us an introduction?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out tonight. Before you tonight is the public hearing for a conditional use permit for a drive-through coffee espresso stand located at 625 South Jackson. This is a drive-through coffee espresso stand, operates from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. daily, 1 to 2 employees at a time. The ingress and egress approaches on the north and south of the property, and there's room for 5 vehicles to queue as required by the drive-through standards, facility standards. The equipment inside the facility includes espresso machine, grinder, blender, microwave, refrigerator, and ice machine as expected. A little bit of background about the espresso stand. In June of 2018, the applicant applied for a conditional use permit. July 30th of 2018, the Board of Adjustment approved this application with 2 conditions. The conditions were that the CUP shall expire after 5 years from the date of approval in order to be able to assess any conditions in the area which have changed within that time frame. The applicant also needed to obtain necessary approvals from Idaho Department of Transportation and meet any requirements deemed necessary to mitigate impact to the transportation system in the area. Construction was complete on August 17th, 2021. And that brings us to today and the subject property site. If you're all familiar with the Silos property just off of Jackson, as you can see here, just on the eastern portion of the property where this purple dot is, this little square is the Knox Box Coffee stand, which is the proposal tonight. The subject property is urban mixed, deemed by the comprehensive plan. It's intended to provide infill development and adaptive reuse for areas in the surrounding downtown. Within these areas, a rich mix of residential and limited commercial use should be promoted throughout the development for small urban apartments, townhomes, 2- and 3-story vertical mixed-use buildings. The urban mixed area should provide pedestrian connection between the University of Idaho and downtown and provide space for a variety of housing alternatives, niche retail, restaurants, artist studios, personal and professional services. And off-street parking should be required but requirements should be reduced in the area to avoid the likely number of non-motorized travel with the uses that the use will attract. Subject property is zoned urban mixed commercial. In urban mixed commercial zoning district, the principal purpose of the zoning district is provide location for urban mixed development, including a range of compatible commercial uses such as retail, eating, drinking establishments, hospitality establishments, professional and personal service uses, as well as residential uses. The UMC zoning district is intended to promote urban development form, promote a mix of commercial and residential land uses, Appropriately applied in close proximity to central business district and the downtown area where urban form and development is appropriate and intensity of allowed commercial land uses can be accommodated. Uses allowed within the UMC zone are residential uses above and behind commercial, amusement and recreation facilities, financial, technology, professional services, food and beverage services, beverage manufacturing, public institutional uses, retail and personal services, temporary uses, parking lots and garages, hotels, motels, and drive-through facilities as a conditionally permitted use. The streets and utility at the subject property, as you know, it's along Jackson Street. That is a national highway. Currently a one-way with 3 southbound lanes and a paved shoulder on the west side of the street. Curb, gutter, and a 5-foot sidewalk are also located on both sides of the street. The applicant has worked with Idaho Department of Transportation and has updated the right-of-way permit for the property. That was condition 2 of the original conditional use permit, which has been satisfied. As far as drive-through standards for within the zoning code, there is a 5 required queuing spaces per service window. This particular coffee stand has 1 service window, so it requires 5 drive-through spaces. Those spaces are required to be 12 by 20 feet in length. Turning radius of no more than 20 feet. The drive-through lanes need to be demarked so that you can tell where to drive. This particular location did have the travel line painted. However, I think there's been some resurfacing in the parking lot, so it's no longer there, and they're currently using cones. Additional queuing when possible. In the original proposal, there was room for additional queuing, and it's still possible if they chose to provide that. There's a landscape buffer requirement for 3 feet between public rights of way and any drive-through facility. So that would be along the Jackson Street side. When the conditional use or when the certificate of occupancy was issued, that landscape buffer was planted, but those plants have since died. This is the site plan that was provided and that was built along with the proposed coffee stand. As you can see, ingress here, queuing lane, coffee stand, and egress out on Jackson. You're all probably very familiar with the site. This is the plans that were submitted for approval with the building permit. This is a mock-up of what it was proposed to look like. And this is the coffee stand as it sits today. So the recommendation tonight would be that you all approve the conditional use permit for the continued use of the drive-through coffee espresso stand located at 625 South Jackson with 2 conditions. Those conditions would be that we review this again within 5 years from the date of approval in order again to assess any conditions in the area which have changed within that time frame. And that the applicant meet all drive-through facility standards, including the delineation of the drive-through lanes and the landscape buffer between the drive-through and the public rights of way be replanted. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
I've got a couple questions. You actually addressed a couple of them already. They had to do with the recommendations the first time and the second time. The first one is the same
Correct.
both times. And I think I know the answer. I just want to make it clear. If we review this in 5 years, at that point, the business will have been there 10 years.
Correct.
And if a business there 10 years, I'm assuming that it's successful. I don't want this to be a reason to kick them out in 10 years. It's more a reason to make sure the landscape buffers in place, those types of things. Is that a fair assessment?
The 5-year recommendation is to be able to assess the urban renewal district and what's kind of being developed on that property in that area at that time. If it is still conducive to that, to the development that's in the area, you all can again approve that for an extended use as well. The landscape buffer and the striping of the drive-through lane would need to be done. Planting obviously in the spring, probably not a great time to plant right now, but that would need to be done to continue the use right now.
Okay. Then the other part of that was item 2 changed a little bit. My first question you already answered was the number 2 from 5 years ago, and it sounds like those were addressed.
Correct.
That doesn't change now. The highway is changing coming into town, but there's no effect to the current condition, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, there will be no change. And ITD has approved that permit for them to use that ingress and egress. There should be no change to that.
Okay. And then the new number 2, I wasn't sure what things needed to happen. It sounds like now they need spaces and striping and a buffer strip replanted.
Yep.
A question that I have now though is, a buffer street along there would be difficult. Would the description of the buffer required, could that be above ground
It's already,
potted plants if they so choose to do so?
we,
It might be easier to maintain, is the only reason I ask.
we require them to be in ground,
Okay.
and permanent. They were once planted, so there is space and an area to do so. They just have died between now and the time that they were inspected.
Other questions?
So, yeah, Amy, you did a real good job with defining everything for us and answered 2 of my questions. The third question I got is, do you know of any traffic incidents on the property or adjacent to the property? Has there been any reports of any kind of accident there?
You know, I can't speak to any kind of accidents. That would probably be something for the police department. I have not heard of any traffic complaints. We haven't had, at least to my knowledge, we haven't had any concern or issue. The drive-through lanes do meet all the required standards as far as zoning code goes. The approach and ingress and egress meet the ITD's requirement, and they've approved it. So,
And Amy, is this considered a new conditional use permit or an extension of the existing one?
it would just be a continuation of the previous. So it would essentially be new, I guess, extending and adding on to. So there's really not much change to the original conditional use permit, but because the condition did ask for the applicant to come back in 5 years and revisit so that you all could assess conditions, that's why we're here today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you, Amy.
Problem.
With that, I open it up to public comment, and I'm assuming our one person is probably the applicant. If you would come up to the stand, state your name and address, and tell us a little bit about your project and application, and go from there.
Is this thing on?
Should be. You might want to tip it up. You're tall.
I haven't been behind a podium in a few years. My name is Chris Kruger, born and raised here in Moscow. Been in the coffee trades since 2007. Done a bunch of different things. Opening my own stand was a long-term goal, and I've been doing that and working in there full time and then some for the last 2.5 years now. Yeah. Any questions?
You're independent from the Silo Social.
Correct.
Okay.
I like to tell people I was here first.
Okay.
We're kind of the unofficial Bootsers drive-through. So that's actually where I started as a barista back in 2007. Did that for a couple of years. Been roasting coffee there since 2012. And yeah, a lot of people were asking for someone to open a Bootsers drive-through. So my brother and I jumped on the opportunity.
So this first conditional use was 5 years ago. If you've been there 2.5 years, I'm assuming that you required it at some point in time during that 5-year timeframe?
Acquired? Or sorry, I didn't understand.
Well, if you've been running it for 2.5 years.
So
in this
2.5 years since we opened.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Getting
So you've
everything-
been there since the initial conditional use
Yes.
permit or
Yeah.
involved?
My,
Okay.
my brother and I started planning this in about 9 years ago. Yeah. Took a few years to get everything up and running.
Any other questions for applicant? This seems pretty straightforward.
I have one question. In our packet, it talked about the fact that the city requires landscaping
Uh-huh.
and in some plants, and it talks about the fact that the plants that were planted have all died, and so I'm just wondering if you have any.
So a couple of
Plans.
things. I planted those myself. That would have been, I think that was before we opened. So that would have been going on 3 years ago, right before the heat bubble during the summer of 21. So I planted those, watered them, kept them going. But then the heat, we had a few weeks of 100-degree temperatures and it just wiped them out. So part of the problem I discovered digging into where the plan required us to place things was there's a concrete retaining wall on that property adjacent to the sidewalk.
Mhm.
And once you get down under the smaller grade gravel that's on the surface, it's nothing but very coarse basalt fill underneath. So it's very difficult to plant or keep anything alive. And everything there with all the pavement and concrete makes summertime temperatures just very intensely hot. So
Yeah.
that was.
Have you tried any planters?
Well, we considered, I think we may have asked the same question about above ground planters as opposed to digging into the rock.
That kind of was my reason for
Yeah,
asking that question. but
appreciated that.
I'm hoping that, assuming this moves forward, that there's something that you can work out with the city or with, certain types of plantings or even just building that up.
Yeah.
So that it's not necessarily above grade, but give it enough depth to plant suitable plants for
Yeah.
streetscape.
The only other thing that came up, because I talked to the property owner, Andrew Krapashitz, about what to do, just told him, we planted stuff. The city would probably ask us to replant it at some point. And he told me that he wanted me to wait because he had another idea of what to do with that.
Okay.
So I was wondering, maybe, is that something we could work out where he could meet the requirements, or is that something that I need to do?
Well, he's the landlord, so technically as part of this, in my mind, you're a team.
Yeah.
As long as it's met,
As long as it's met.
I don't care, and I don't think the city cares how it's met, as
Okay.
long as it's met. I'm just hoping there's a little leeway between what you can do, what the city will allow, and what the landlord
Yeah.
has in plan, that there's a happy medium.
But I
somewhere.
figured even if the city requires in ground, it's like I could just excavate more and create a better bed, hopefully keep things alive.
Marshall?
Amy, if this is approved, could you get Mr. Kruger to introduce him to the city's xeriscape
Yeah, that's what
people?
Yeah.
that's what I was gonna
Well,
recommend.
that was actually, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that was one of the things that came up during the initial approval was the limitations on what species could be planted there. So there was, I forget exactly what it was, but a certain number of criteria for the types of bushes that we could plant and the types of trees that we could plant. None of which were drought tolerant. But yeah, if there's a xeriscaping solution, I'd be very eager to pursue that.
Any other questions? Marshall? Hello?
Well, Joe, this seems very straightforward to me, and I think that the successful business there over the past 5 years and the conditions that are for the next 5 years, I don't see any problems with it, and very happy to
Make a motion.
make a motion to it.
Any more comments, Chris? We'll let you sit while we talk. Unless you've got additional
One-
items to.
Just the one other item about the delineation. So I have been using codes. And I've been doing that since we started. I think we had codes and painted lines initially. There was, our painted lines were obliterated mostly by the weather and traffic. And then Andrew had a paving crew come out and pave part of the section at the north end of the property. And then also a lane. So there is a lane, I think it's 14 feet wide, of asphalt pavement pointing right towards us. And I asked at the time about painting on that, both, delineations for the lane and no parking signs on the asphalt itself. And there was a concern raised by Andrew and his contractor that they didn't want to do any unnecessary painting or any painting that would have to be obliterated or covered up later. So does the presence of asphalt with gravel on either side, does that possibly meet the requirements for, indicating where the lane is? Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Does the code assume that there's traffic coming from both directions to the espresso stand? Because in this case, I assume it's only one way, right? Because you're right off the road?
Theoretically, although people are very creative with how they enter and exit.
Hence the reason for curbing and lines. And I would say I would use cones too, personally. But Amy answered how I was going to answer it. Code's gonna prompt the landlord.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be there. So
I'm happy to tell him that.
Yeah. he might be happy to tell you it's gonna be your dime on his property, but we'll leave that between the two of you.
Are there any requirements for, because I mean, last time we just got a can of paint and a spraying tool from MBS. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, as long as it meets the required standards for length, and it's a 4 foot in your 4 inch line, you're fine to do it yourself.
Perfect.
Well, anything else? We'll let you sit and
Thank
we'll-
you.
Thank you, Chris.
Joe?
With that, I'll close the public hearing. I do, before I know I'm going to be a motion in a second, this is a slam dunk, but so that we don't just overwhelm Ivy for the first time, on a conditional use permit, there's 7 criteria that we can listen to anything anybody out here says, and I do my best to make sure anybody out here can say anything they want, but I do try to reinforce to them to try to make a point towards one of these 7, because that's really all we can deal with for criteria. And so in the next few years, as you're on the board, you'll get to know what these are. But in general, I would say that in terms of the relevant criteria, this is, it's permitted in this zoning district. It's not only harmonious with the neighborhood, it actually is part of that neighborhood. It will not create nuisances. It hasn't so far. There's no one here to attest that there hasn't been an issue there. Items 4 and 5 about adequately served streets, and potential health and safety, 4 and 5. I don't think those are an issue. Obviously, we don't have any kind of police reports, but there's no one here claiming that it's unsafe. And I'm assuming that the police department would have an issue if it was a problem. And then item 6, does it meet applicable development standards? Obviously, they have to update a few things to do that. That's one of the recommendations the city gave us. And then the 7th one is, will it be in conflict with the comprehensive plan? And obviously it's not. It's one of those diverse types of things that makes our city run. So with that, I don't see an issue with any of those 7. So Marshall, would you care to make a motion?
Sure. I'd move approval of the conditional use permit or the extension of the previous conditional use permit. And I would also add as conditions to that exactly what staff's recommendation was, that the conditional use permit shall expire 5 years from the date of approval. And the second one, the applicants shall meet all drive-through facility standards, including the declination of drive-through lane, landscape buffer between the drive-through lane and the public street right of way. And along with that, I would also ask staff to provide in the future a reason statement of relevant criteria and standards for us to take a look at.
Second?
I have a motion. I have a second. We'll go down the line. We'll start with Jerry.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That is unanimous. And congratulations, you have your conditional use permit, and staff will generate stuff for us to prove in our next meeting. Normally, I would skip myself, and I usually go last, but I didn't want to put you on the spot, so you right down there at the end. And I didn't see that this was going to even potentially be a tie, so wouldn't want you to be in that spot. That said, our last order, well, not our last one, we got announcements and stuff, but we need to do elections of officers for 2024. Any thoughts? Does anybody want the chance to be the lead or the vice lead, that's, you know,
I see a lot of candidates right down this.
on the right side of the table.
I make a motion that we have Joe as our chairman and Marshall as our vice chairman if they're willing to take it on for another year.
Let's do them one at a time, Steve.
Wait a second.
Steve, you want to revise your first motion?
I'll
or
revise
I
my
guess
first
The
motion.
the chair spot, not the president
Yeah,
spot.
I recommend that I make a motion that we ask Joe to carry on as the chairman of the Board of Adjustment for another year.
Well, wait a minute.
I,
You're just asking him to say, yes, he will. You're not electing him.
I would accept if so chosen, I would accept because quite frankly, it's easier to be the mediator than to actually come up with motions.
Then
So
I'll second that.
And I would add to the discussion that Joe has done a fantastic job for just about as long as I've known him. So thank you, Joe.
Yes.
Especially since we only meet twice a year.
yeah, sure. Opportunity to mess it up. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Guess that's unanimous. So for vice chair, Steve, would you care to kind of make a second one again?
Well, will make a motion that we elect as vice chair Marshall Comstock for the year 2024.
So let me, a word before you vote. I'd be happy to serve as vice chair, but sometimes some new blood is pretty nice too. And maybe one of these other people would like to have a chance at being vice chair.
Hey, I'm fine. I don't want to make decisions.
I don't know, I'm not opposed, but I think you guys are doing great. So you got the corporate knowledge that's, yeah, that's I guess how best I can say it.
Second.
So, okay, I have a motion, I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Guess we should thank Marshall for the opportunity, but,
Thanks, guys.
but
So, that is approved. Any new reports, announcements? I know our next upcoming meeting is going to be 5:30, January 17th. I don't remember what day of the week.
Wednesday.
That's a Wednesday, okay? And that'll be the approval for minutes and the,
Is everyone else able to make that meeting?
I will not.
I'm not able to be here either. I want to make sure you have a quorum.
so Jennifer, we know we don't have two. Do we have the other 5 of us? I know I'm a yes for that one.
I think I can be there.
I have a conflict that evening.
I mean, my other choice was to be in Arizona, but.
oh, come on.
If the weather keeps up like this, we might all want to be.
So
in
that you can
Arizona.
approve the minutes. Yeah.
Announcements was Ivy is now on our board, but I kind of bumped that to the front, so. Motion to adjourn?
Move.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Are we still here?
Thank you.